Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this Twin West Minneapolis Regional Chamber Issues and Insights Legislative Breakfast for November. We're going to have a great program this morning. Bear with me while I start sharing my screen. Last month, we got a great presentation from Alyssa Schlander and Rick Forschler at RAP Strategies previewing the election. And this month, we're going to get a review of the election from Blois Olson. And before we get into that, we are going to get some dialogue with our elected officials. We'll do a legislator question. And before we get to that, I think that we're going to thank our sponsors who, without their support, we would be unable to do programming like this. So we're extremely grateful for our sponsors. Our series sponsor is Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures. And then we have our sustaining sponsors, Alina Health, Centerpoint Energy, PCS Human Capital Management, Rasmussen College, Rudy Luther Toyota, and Velocity Public Affairs. Our session sponsors are AAA Minneapolis, AT&T, CBiz MHM, Choice Bank, Comcast, Scott Build, Goff Public, Weber Johnson Public Affairs, and we have a media sponsor, Finance and Commerce, and our in-kind sponsor is Runway Analytics. This morning, our legislator elected official question of the day is, do you think the updated restrictions announced by Governor Walz this week to curb the spread of COVID-19 are too much, too little, or about right? And I'm going to start this morning with Representative Lyndon Carlson.
Well, I would respond. It's a little bit difficult to predict because we're in such a rapidly increasing number of cases and deaths as to whether it's too little or too much or about right. So I would come down at this point and say about right, but I think we're going to have to continue to closely monitor to see what the impact is, and if we're able to turn it around. We'll just have to see if we can bend that curve with the current restrictions that begin, by the way, at 10 o'clock tonight.
Thank you, Representative Carlson. I think next I will go to one of our Hennepin County Commissioners, Commissioner Jan Callison.
Good morning. I'm Jan Callison. I represent the 6th District in Hennepin County. That's all or part of 16 Western suburban communities, and it includes Hopkins and Minnetonka. And I would characterize the governor's actions this week as being practical. I think something had to be done. I'm not sure there's enough public support for really extreme measures. So I'm not sure it'll have a big impact. Hopefully it'll be more impactful than I might think. I do wonder why it wasn't coupled with an announcement of a program to aid these businesses using Federal CARES Act dollars. I think we'll be looking at that in Hennepin County during this next month, whether we can get some additional funds into the hands of the businesses that are going to bear this burden. So that's my assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Callison. And next, I believe we have Representative Morrison with us.
Good morning, Kelly Morrison here. I represent District 33B, which includes 10 communities in the Lake Minnetonka area in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. And I would say that Governor Walz has a very difficult balancing act to strike here. We're teetering on the edge of a very dangerous situation where we may not have the beds or the staff, frankly, to care for people with COVID and non-COVID related illnesses and injuries. So knowing what we do know now about where transmission is happening, I think his actions are a data-driven attempt at a kind of a surgical strike, if you will. But for any of these measures to work, we need buy-in from the public. And I think Commissioner Callison referenced that we don't have total buy-in. And so it's going to be incumbent on all of us to really kind of dig down and do all of our individual parts to slow the spread, or we're going to be in deep trouble. And we're going to have to watch very carefully to see if we need further measures. But I concur that we need federal help to make sure that our businesses survive this. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Morrison. Senator Swedzinski, you are next, but I saw that you just got on, so I will repeat the question for you to give you a few extra moments here to gather yourself. Question is, do you think that the updated restrictions announced by Governor Walz this week to curb the spread of COVID-19 are too much, too little, or about right?
Well, I caught Kelly or Representative Morrison's comments, and she's always right on the money on when it comes to healthcare issues, and so I agree 100% with what she said. I've been thinking a lot lately about something I learned in one of the few things I learned in college that I've retained for the last 45 years, and it was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the top is self-actualization. And I really believe that one of the purposes of government at the local, state, and federal level is trying to certainly not guarantee us self-actualization, but certainly guaranteeing us the pursuit of self-actualization. And at the lower rung of his triangle, if the lower needs aren't being met, you can't reach the higher up needs. And the second basic need of humanity is safety and security, and which ultimately FDR, back in the worst time period, perhaps in humanity, during the Great Depression and World War II, said that the purpose of government is to guarantee people freedom from fear. And I think right now, Governor Walz, every step he has taken is to try to guarantee us to be free from fear and safe and secure from the unknown. And the virus right now is an unknown. And as Representative Morrison said in her statement, he has done a phenomenal job surrounding himself with experts up and down the through his cabinet and executive branch. And the only expert I have is the woman I'm sharing a home with right now, and she's certainly providing me with a plethora of information on how I can continue to be safe personally, but we need the governor's actions right now. And so there was a little bit of a history lesson and a little bit of what I think. And it was an honor to listen to Representative Morrison, who like I said, one of the few doctors in the House, so to speak. So thank you, John Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Socinski, and feel free to interrupt me, Victoria, if I'm missing someone, but I believe that is all of our elected officials. So thank you for your perspective. Thank you for your dialogue. We appreciate it very much. Now I'm going to introduce Blois Olson, who's our panelist this morning. Blois Olson has been at the forefront of online political coverage and commentary in Minnesota for many years. He has been a contributor to WCCO Radio for nearly 20 years. Blois Olson is a daily guest on the Morning News with Dave Lee. On the Morning Take, Blois and Dave discuss the political and public affairs issues at the local, state, and national level. It can be heard weekday mornings at 6:20. He's also the founder and principal of Fluence Media, a high-stakes media consulting and content creation company. Blois was named one of the top marketers in 2012 by the Minnesota Business Magazine, and one of 200 Minnesotans you should know by Twin Cities Business Magazine in 2011. We're grateful to have you with us this morning, Blois. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will give you some time to get set up on your end. And thank you again to our legislators for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks, JP. I will take this moment for getting this screen up. And we'll go from there. I hope everybody can see that.
Looks good.
Thanks. Well, first and foremost, thanks to everyone for being here. This is one of my favorite biennial events because it's home. I've worked in and around the Twin West Chamber for 20 plus years. I live in St. Louis Park. And as I scroll through the attendees, there's a lot of people I have not seen in months. And so I wish we could all be together, and hopefully we will be soon. I want to go through here quickly and just give you kind of a snapshot of what we've seen in our data and analysis about the election. and kind of connect some dots about what happened and where we are and maybe where we're headed. I do have the chat box up, and by all means, the Masters is on. It may be on a screen just above the screen I'm reading from, but I know you guys are smart and can multitask, so we'll let it go from there. You know, the first thing I think we're all aware of in this election is turnout. 3 times as many Minnesotans requested and voted by absentee ballot compared to 2 years ago. One really interesting number that just came out overnight is that only 1% of the ballots that were still outstanding on election day actually came in after election day. So that last minute push to get people to drop off their ballots or go vote in person really did pay off. There was not a wave. And to put that in perspective, there was about 240,000 ballots that had been requested and delivered, but hadn't made it back before election day. And we only had about 2,400 of those come back through the mail. So, and then one of the ongoing themes that Minnesota needs to pay attention to is urban turnout. Democrats decided a few years ago, and they recognized the math, that they really needed to turn out folks in specifically the 5th district, but also in the urban core and suburbs in order to just win statewide. And to put that in perspective for Minneapolis, they had over 80% participation in the city of Minneapolis. And if you think back just 4, 6, 8 years, urban turnout was not that high. And that's a changing dynamic. There's many reasons for it, organizing being one, and passion in this election being another. But there's a few key observations that everyone should really take heart with during this this election. Joe Biden overperformed legislative DFLers in places like Dakota County and suburban Hennepin County in a big way. And we're going to break down those numbers a little later. And I know there's some folks in the audience and Representative Morrison who lived this. So we're going to point out those numbers, and even specifically in her district and in Maple Grove. But that kind of, as you dig down on election night, we thought, well, maybe that's a little frustration with walls on COVID, which 9 days later seems very interesting considering the spike we're in the middle of. Many young families and sentiment there, but also the defund the police. We saw in independent expenditures from groups on the left, like Take Action and SEIU, that they communicated in the suburbs about social justice issues in a big way. And that was the counterweight to what Republicans were communicating about, which was keeping our suburbs safe and the whole defund the police theme. And finally, one other factor we'll dig into here is the pro-marijuana or third-party candidates. They happen to be pro-marijuana this time, but Minnesota has a history of third-party candidates who have major party status peeling off. And at the top of the ticket, that was not an issue this time. So at the presidential level, voters were either Trump or Biden. There was very little interest in third-party candidates. However, that was not the case in Minnesota in down ballot races. For Republicans, Trump had a lot of energy and coattails, especially in greater Minnesota. Several rural counties hit over 90% in voter turnout. The Seward County right now is at about 93.6%. And if you think about just that level of turnout in a community and the intensity of this election, it's not surprising, but I don't know that I've ever seen 93% turnout in my 20 plus years of watching these things. Rural issues related to jobs and the economy remain an issue for rural DFLers, but defund the police was the message that was run in rural legislative races. And then ultimately, the economy and jobs were an issue for Democrats in the early 2000s too. If you go back to the 2000 presidential election or the 2004 presidential election, much of that was about a blue and a red America as well. And in 2008, that changed dramatically when Barack Obama was elected. And so just something on the horizon to keep your eye on, depending on the economic recovery and the recession here, is that in 2008, rural America, they didn't overwhelmingly vote for Barack Obama, but they did vote for him in much larger numbers. And that was likely because of the recession at the time. A few key counties to look at from this year. Olmsted County, the Rochester area, which I really thought would be a strong bellwether with the Mayo Clinic, impacted by COVID. Biden won by 17,000 votes there. In 2016, Senator Clinton only won by 600 votes there. And in 2008, President Obama won it by 1,500 votes. So you can see that there's a lot of votes changing in Olmsted County. It's a growth county, but also that it is a swing county for the foreseeable future in Minnesota. The other notable piece there is that while Biden won by 17,000 votes there, the two state senators who are Republicans won there as well, which is one of the greatest examples of Minnesota's ticket splitting as well. Washington County to the East Metro, Biden was leading by more than 10,000 votes, continued. Clinton underperformed by 3,000 votes, and Trump has only basically matched McCain's totals there. So again, these suburban counties. Anoka County, which is long thought to be very Republican, and it is, but Trump only won it by 4,400 votes when just 4 years ago, he won it by 18,000 votes. And so if you think that this was just about kind of the suburban counties of the South and West Metro or the East Metro, we oftentimes have to remember that much of the growth in the Twin Cities area is to the north in Anoka County. And then two last key counties in the state, St. Louis County, Biden was leading by 19,000 votes. Clinton won it by 13,000 votes. But President Obama won St. Louis County in 2008 by 38,000 votes. And I think that just gives you a snapshot of the change in the 8th district, even in the population center. Finally, Blue Earth County, Biden won it by 1,500 votes, but Trump won it by 1,200 votes. So that's the Mankato area, and we can go from there. So the three big takeaways are, and we'll walk through these, the issues that decided this race were not on the radar till June. So whether you're Senator Swat or Representative Morrison or working in the caucuses or representing outside groups, you could do all the research about healthcare or the environment or taxes before the election, but ultimately those weren't the issues that this election was decided on. And that happens every 6 to 8 years here in Minnesota, is that issues emerge that are really not the core issues. The outside money that was spent on issues, specifically on the Democratic side, were not a priority of voters. Yes, they are important issues and we'll walk through them, but they were not the priority in the July through November timeframe. And then marijuana or pot is an issue that is going to impact both traditional major parties here for the foreseeable future. So why did people vote? This is exit polling of 3,100 Minnesotans. So this is Minnesota specific data, and I'll try to call out Minnesota versus national data here as we go through. Did you vote for your candidate? 63% said yes. Of those, 50 Trump wins. Against somebody, Biden wins in Minnesota. Which is more important right now? Contain the virus or rebuild the economy? These were the two issues that voters thought about. If it was containing the virus, Biden won. If it was rebuilding the economy, Trump won. But 54% of Minnesotans on exit polls thought containing the virus was more important than rebuilding the economy at this time. I know we're 9 days out. I know we all have opinions. We're watching, we're refreshing our screens, we're checking Twitter for the latest in the transition of power. But this tension over the transition of power feels new, and it is somewhat new, but it's not, it shouldn't be a surprise, because since 2008, there's been a huge credibility gap between the results of the election and the way the losing side felt about it. You can see there in 2008, there was a 32% gap between the trust in the election between Democrats and Republicans. In 2012, it was 34%. In 2016, it flipped to 34% for Democrats. And then ultimately this year, it's doubled almost at 64% gap between people having trust that the elections were free and fair. And then again, right after in Minnesota, how confident will you be that the votes are counted accurately? 91% confidence in Minnesota that our votes were counted accurately. And I do think we have the gold standard here and people really do trust it. But of those 9% that aren't confident, they support Trump at an 80-20 swing. And obviously you can start to see there that that's a major gap. And it tells you that that group that really doesn't trust the election results, while they are vocal and they are loud and they have a lot of energy, probably doesn't reflect a large majority of even Republicans. And then exit polling. What kind of place do you live in? So this is national, and it shows on a national level kind of the breakdown of whether you were from a suburb, a small city, or a metropolitan area where your votes fell. And this aligns with Minnesota. And then nationally, I think it's important for us to look first to take a snapshot of what were the 5 issues that mattered most. Nationally, racial inequality was 20% of all voters. The economy was 35% of all of that voters, then the pandemic, and then crime and safety and healthcare policy. Well, I don't know about you, and even I, for months ahead of time, probably ahead of May or June, felt like healthcare policy was going to be a major election issue, and it shows that it wasn't there. On the flip side, crime and safety wasn't on many people's radar screens as a top 5 issue, but it turned into one during this year. Now, in Minnesota, how does that break down? In Minnesota, the economy was the top issue of voters. 32% felt like that was the top issue. The virus was second at 19%, so a 13% gap there. Then it was healthcare policy in Minnesota, followed closely by racial inequality, and then lastly was crime and safety. So Minnesota did not align with the national theme. The economy was the biggest issue, but the pandemic was more important to Minnesota voters than racial inequality. And so how does that align with national gaps in these kind of more emergent issues at the end of the day? So the economy favored Trump, but it was a top 5 issues for 74% of voters nationally. Healthcare, second, but a huge gap there. You could see that there's a 38-point gap there between Biden and Trump voters on healthcare. But Supreme Court appointments, very important to both sides. The virus, not important to Trump voters. Foreign policy, equally important, and choice and abortion issues, equally important. So the traditional issues of Supreme Court issues, foreign policy, that polarization and intensity stayed tight, but the economy, healthcare, and the virus were the volatile issues. And then just where are we as a country? I think, I pulled this stat because I think it just kind of goes to show that only 1 in 5 Biden and Trump supporters agree that the values and goals of America are the same between the two parties. I think that, that begins to kind of shape the state we're in right now. So I know it's early, and I know there's been a little chat about this in the 2nd district, but it really played out more probably in the US Senate race, and that is marijuana is an issue. This is data just from last week from Gallup that shows that, yes, it's at an all-time high, the idea of legalizing marijuana. at 68% of Americans believe, yes, it should be legal. Obviously, this is a federal issue, but it is an issue here in Minnesota. It was talked about a lot in 2018, but it wasn't talked about much this year. But I want to kind of preview how it plays out nationally for a party. So I want you to have this in the back of your mind as we talk about the volatility and the down ballot issues that Democrats and Republicans had. So even Republicans are split 48-52, so very even on this issue nationally. Meanwhile, independents and Democrats overwhelmingly support legalization. Conservatives, if you call yourself a conservative, a moderate, or a liberal, you can see the breakdown there. And then people of faith. Even people who attend religious services weekly are divided only 52-48 on this issue. So the last issue we saw move this quickly was same-sex marriage. Within 4 to 6 years, America changed their mind on this issue. And more, there are issues like that that America is changing its mind on. And when that happens, that creates future volatility or opportunity, depending on which party you're in. Now, in Minnesota, how are we doing with the virus? So 55% believe that the federal efforts on the virus were going badly. These are Minnesota voters. And 43% thought it was going well or very well. But has it caused you in Minnesota financial hardship? 42% say yes, 57% say no. And that's where you start to see, again, this economic division in the voters. So which is more important right now in Minnesota? We already touched that. And then now we're going to pivot to the crime and safety and social justice, racial justice issues. So in Minnesota, exit poll from CNN, are these recent incidents in which police have killed or injured Black people, are they isolated or are they a sign of a broader problem? 65% of Minnesotans after Election Day believe these are signs of a broader problem. Those were naturally Biden voters. If they thought they were an isolated event, only 28%. Those were Trump voters. In Minnesota, racism in the country is the most important problem, 8%, an important problem, 66%, and a minor problem or not a problem at all only adds up to 24%. So this is a signal to Republicans that racism and racial issues are not only a Democratic leading issue if 76% of Minnesotans believe it is an important problem or the most important problem. And this was the one issue that provided a lot of passion for Democrats. And then in Minnesota, do you view Black Lives Matter as favorable or unfavorable? 51% say it's favorable and 44% say it's unfavorable. And I know there's probably some questions that will come up from this. So since we're not at our tables enjoying a nice breakfast, take notes and we'll hit it. But the issue on racial justice, the issue on marijuana, and then police reform are the three issues that probably had the most energy and concern for voters, especially in the suburbs. So as you look at intensity here, I'm going to go through some maps. First is here you can see, and these are not, this is not an issue with coloring on the snapshot, but you can see here that Biden's intensity and Trump's intensity in the red on the left versus the Senate race, you can see that there wasn't as much intensity for Senate candidates. And that's in the US Senate race. Now, let's look at the trend for the Minnesota State Senate in intensity the last 3 cycles. On the left, you can see 2012, the second Obama term, and how the state looked for state Senate districts. Then 4 years ago, and now this year. We don't have the intensity numbers by county or by district yet here, but you can start to see that this idea of Republicans from greater Minnesota, Democrats from urban and suburban Minnesota is the reality. David Montgomery from NPR noted that if if Minnesotans were not split ticket voters in legislative races this year, the Democrats would control the Minnesota Senate 37-30. Think about that. That's an 8-seat swing based on split ticket voting. In the Minnesota House, you can see here that it has been a slower trend, not as stark for Republicans, but it is also notable of the greater Minnesota seats that Republicans have picked up. Democrats have a greater Minnesota issue on many issues that were new this year: racial justice, defund the police, but also on economic development and jobs and agriculture. And it's something to be mindful of. And then presidential by county, the last two cycles. And then I go back to 2008, which was really Democrats' peak year. But you can see that, Blue Earth County, Winona County, you can start to see some of the swing counties, though, even between 2016 and 2020. So if this race was decided in the suburbs, how was it decided? Well, we've looked through all the ads, both from the parties, from the candidates in key races, from Lakeville to Maple Grove to the West Metro. And what we can see is that Republican groups and Republican organizations and candidates ran ads on three main topics: public safety, the economy, and healthcare. Democratic groups, Democratic aligned candidates and party organizations ran ads on all of these 7 topics and maybe some more: healthcare, marriage equality, climate, COVID, faith and equity, gun control, choice. So to pick on one Senate district, just because it's a good snapshot, that's Maple Grove, which I believe is a lot like Eden Prairie was 4 to 6 years ago. I think it is trending blue. I think that it's only a matter of time and or redistricting that Maple Grove has a DFL senator. And, there's a lot that can change there, but it's a split district with a DFL House member on one side and a Republican House member on the other side. And so just to put it in perspective, here are some examples of ads from Senate District 34, where Senator Warren Limmer was a top 5 target for Democrats. His own ad: safety in our suburbs. Planned Parenthood: Limmer led the attempt to ban marriage equality in Minnesota. Every town for gun safety: Warren Limmer won't keep us safe from gun violence. Now, hindsight is easy, and we watched some of these during the campaign, but in many ways, as effective as Democrats and Democratic aligned groups may think that marriage equality is an attack, most voters believe that issue's been decided and we're going to move on. And it wasn't on their minds during a pandemic, nor was it on their minds during urban unrest and discussion of defunding the police. Now here's 3 more ads. Fight for the Union, paid for by conservative groups. Unlike his opponent, Warren Limmer disavows John Thompson. Meanwhile, the largest funded DFL group is running ads about climate change. And then North Star Values, which is the Senate independent expenditure: fewer police means more crime and chaos. Voters do not have, especially in 2020, the ability to manage and juggle 7 or 8 ads in their heads, especially in the suburbs. There's a generational issue here, I know, on climate and climate voters that are younger. But if you think about Maple Grove, the number of, quote, climate voters there versus school voters or pandemic voters or keep the suburbs safe voters is very minimal. And so I really believe one of the major reasons why DFLers weren't more effective is they tried to talk about way too many issues in the suburbs. They did not focus. We saw that 54% of Minnesotans thought the pandemic was the most important issue. There were very few ads run on the pandemic. And if they were run on the pandemic, they were criticizing somebody like Limmer for not being with Governor Walz. Well, Governor Walz's greatest popularity slippage came in the suburbs over the last year. He's still popular. He's still above 54, 55% there. But be mindful that those were not the issues on voters' minds this year. And I know that Representative Morrison's here, so she's probably lived these, so I'm sorry if you have to relive them. But here's an example of two districts, one Representative Morrison, one Representative Bonner in the Western Metro. So Joe Biden wins 53% in Representative Morrison's district. Dean Phillips, 50. Representative Morris, 50. And the third party average in the US Senate race and others was 4.5% pro-marijuana votes in that district. Be mindful of that as we go forward, because this is a district that, would there have been a pro-marijuana candidate on the ballot in the House race, it's probably unlikely that Representative Morrison is reelected. And in the Maple Grove seat, where in Maple Grove, on the more DFL half of the 34 district, Biden wins with 56%. And the third party candidate in the US Senate race, third party candidates in the US Senate race get up to 6.5. And Dean Phillips and Representative Bonner outperform Tina Smith in that district. So just be mindful that the slippage here was significant. And even if DFLers only underperformed by 1 or 2 points, the status and the margins and the DFL majorities in the House and the Senate are much larger. Let me drink of water, 1 sec. And then by congressional district, just to be to take a peek. So in CD3, Biden won with 58%. Senator Smith has a drop off of 5%. Dean Phillips outperforms Senator Smith, but the third party average in the Senate race is 6.75%. And so you can see that about 5% of that 6.75 probably hurt Tina, but some did hurt Jason Lewis. And you'll start to see that in greater Minnesota counties even more. In 2nd Congressional District, Joe Biden 52%, Smith 47%, Andrew Craig 48%, and we had a candidate on the ballot who had passed away who got 6% of the vote. And then in the 6th district, you see here that Representative Tom Emmer outperforms Donald Trump by 6 points. So again, split ticket voters in the suburbs are not just DFL voters. Here you had Biden Emmer voters. And then the third party in that ever independent 6th congressional district added up to 8% in the US Senate race. So Senator Smith was in the high 30s in the 6th. And then in greater Minnesota, you see that Trump had better tails than Biden did in the suburbs. You see here the drop off in the Senate race, and then a 10% drop off for Michelle Fischbach. That will likely not stay that way. It'll be very tough for Democrats to be as competitive as they were with Colin Peterson there. But then again, as you see a 4-point drop off in the Senate race, the average third party vote there was 6.5%. So 2 to 1 split away from Republicans of those pro-marijuana voters. In the 1st district, you see here that Jim Hagedorn actually underperformed Jason Lewis, but still won. And again, that third party really did hurt Dan Feehan here in the 1st. And then in the 8th, Trump 56, Stauber 57, Jason Lewis 52, and third party pro-marijuana candidates are 7%. And then in the urban core, when we get back to this, right before we wrap up here, is in the 5th congressional district, Joe Biden gets 80% of the vote with a 7% drop off for Senator Smith and a 16% drop off for Representative Omar. Third party candidates here probably hurt Jason Lewis more, 8 to 9%. In the 4th, Biden 67, Smith 61, McCollum 63, and third party candidates pro-marijuana 8% on average in those races. So as we conclude this part, and I'll look in the chat and feel free to unmute if you can ask questions that way too. But really, the volatility in ticket splitting in Minnesota continues. Historically, a couple elections that this one will remind us of. In 2008, Barack Obama won Minnesota by more than 300,000 votes. Al Franken won by 300. And in 2006, we elected Amy Klobuchar by an overwhelming margin for her first term and re-elected Governor Pawlenty to his second term. So this ticket splitting is not new in Minnesota. It's probably not going to change. It goes back to 1990 when we elected Paul Wellstone and Arne Carlson on the same day. So it's just one of those things that as we always think and get caught up in the idea of a wave, or Biden's going to run really well in the suburbs, or Trump's really going to run great in greater Minnesota, that when legislative races are decided between 500 and 1,000 votes, that it really is local, but that the national mindset does still give Minnesotans a moment to say, I might not like Trump, but I'm really not sure that I can trust Democrats on this issue. And I think that was ultimately the key. The other major finding here is that there was not a lot of issues talked about during this election. It was a very personality, emotion issue driven campaign. And so does policy still matter in campaigns? This election would tell us that policy was lost. It was really an emotional election on personalities and the pandemic. And then the thing to watch here as we go forward is redistricting, not just whether or not we lose or keep all of our congressional seats, but there will be a shift in legislative power because of the gain in population in the suburbs and the urban areas and a loss of population in greater Minnesota. And so Democrats, if they can figure out some of these suburban issues, will have an advantage going forward. Having said that, if the legislature has been decided in the suburbs for, I think, probably the last 10 years, it will be even more decided in the suburbs in the next 10 to 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Blois. I'm just looking at the Q&A here. We had one question that came through from Mike. If Minneapolis can control the whole state vote like other major cities, do you think more states will split their electoral votes like Nebraska and Maine?
So I got this question a lot during the days before the election and in the hours after, as people were watching Maine and Nebraska. Why doesn't Minnesota do this? I think that may be an effort, but again, with divided government here in Minnesota, it's probably unlikely to happen here anytime soon. And I think you'd have to see multiple states doing it. There is an effort that probably has a little more momentum, and that's the national popular vote effort and reforming the Electoral College. But those are historical changes and big lifts that I think we're still a long ways from seeing that come into reality.
Thank you. And then Al Swintek has this is a big question. I'm going to be curious to see how you answer this. What does the Republican Party need to do to pick up more urban votes? And what does the Democrat Party need to do to pick up more rural votes? And if you can answer this, Blois has got the crystal ball here. Everyone will want to hire him.
Thanks, JP. Well, first and foremost, I'm 20 plus years retired from helping parties win elections. So I don't need to be hired for that. So, I think that there are some things that Republicans will focus on when it comes to urban votes. And one is that President Trump did prove that he made up ground, unlike any Republican in our lifetime, on African-American votes and Latino votes. He also outperformed on gay and lesbian votes, even in urban areas. There's a certain independence there. The question is that personality driven from President Trump for Republicans, or can they actually talk about issues that are important to those audiences? I know here in Minnesota, there's long been an effort by Republicans to try to work with voters of color, whether it's Asian immigrants or Latino immigrants, but they've never been able to kind of pick that up and keep it in a sustainable way. They've always thought that faith issues and work ethic, tax issues for Asians, and then the pro-life issue and faith issues for Latinos could be their ticket. But you have to balance that with the rhetoric we heard for 4 years about immigration and Latinos and caravans. Remember those days? So that's where I think those voters in urban areas for Republicans need to see some different changes. I will say that there is probably an opportunity that we will see in 2021, and we'll see it play out. And I don't know if it's going to be as helpful for Republicans, but with all the city council members up and the mayor's race up in Minneapolis, if crime and safety isn't the number one discussion point in Minneapolis in 2021, and that doesn't decide some pieces of the election, then I think that Republicans will see an opportunity there, because I think that would further polarize urban voters as well. For Democrats in rural areas, there are a few key issues. Well, traditionally vulnerabilities would have been on guns or patriotism or things like that. There are a couple issues. One is the environment. Congressman Stauber had a tagline this year that really struck me as I traveled the state, and I saw it and I heard it on the radio, and that was fighting for our way of life. And I think that there is a sense, and I believe some of it's actually true, the Democrats do not respect the rural way of life. And there's been many stories written about Minnesota nationally, from the Washington Post to the New York Times, where somebody from an urban seat will say something about greater Minnesota that is just not in touch. I traveled all four corners of the state this fall, and the intensity on the top of the ticket was very strong in the 8th district. Other than that, it wasn't that strong Trump or Biden anywhere. But the pickups with flags and the signs pasted to cars was most intense in the 8th district, as, quote, that fighting for your way of life. And then as you drill down, I think you have to look at issues like jobs and economic development. The cities that have a lot of jobs in greater Minnesota don't have housing. So if Democrats were out there talking about housing, that's different than talking about the environment. Meanwhile, there are places that don't have jobs that need jobs. And, the decisions came down yesterday. And this is a good vignette into the current DFL and Democratic operation in Minnesota. The decision on line 3 that the PCA and the DNR made yesterday is something that, a governor like a former Democratic governor like a Rudy Perpich would have just gotten done. He just would have gotten it done. And Tim Walz has really kind of sat on his hands on this and kind of let it all play out. And the reason is evident on Twitter, which is not real, but it provides some insight into this. The responses to my tweets that simply permits were granted yesterday against Tim Walz from the left were very strong. And to summarize the tone of them, and this summarizes Democrats' job problem in greater Minnesota and issues, is he hasn't done enough to save people from dying during a pandemic. And now Governor Walz, specifically calling him out, is going to kill people with line 3. So the far left equates environmental justice the way they do pandemic justice, and that's a tension point. And then nationally, I will just say the issue is, and this played out in Washington last week, that Minnesota really is kind of, we find ourselves in these places historically. Fascinating, because the issues that were born out after the killing of George Floyd from defund the police played out in districts across the country where Democrats lost swing districts. And moderate Democrats in the US House called out the squad and others and said, I don't want to hear about socialist ideas or defund the police ever again. And even James Clyburn said, Democrats will not be a majority party if those are the issues. And since this is a business group, I think I'm safe in saying this, even though it'll live forever, is that still at its core, America is a capitalist country. And even though the far left is pushing this, and it is alive and well in Minneapolis, and there are newly elected members of the Minnesota House in the last 2 years that ran as Democratic Socialists, not as DFLers. And that's where the problem is. So Democrats need to recruit candidates that understand business, jobs, and economic development in greater Minnesota. And they have to be able to be independent and not feel the wrath of the far left.
Thank you. One question I had, you've talked about this in the morning take, which is Blois's morning tip sheet. That covers a lot of Minnesota political stuff. Yesterday in the Minnesota Senate, we saw Republicans elect a Democrat to be president of the Senate. And this all plays into whether Senator Klobuchar is potentially appointed to a cabinet position. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it is quite interesting.
So yeah, I think these are the palace intrigue, let's just say, that we're going to experience between now and when the legislature convenes or when President Biden is sworn in, is the what ifs. So a lot of the what ifs have become, what if Klobuchar is appointed to a cabinet position? Would seem logical. It's been talked about for years. She was very loyal to Biden. She's been named for Attorney General and potentially Ag Secretary. But there's another scenario here that can't be dismissed either, and that is that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is appointed to a federal position, whether or not Senator Klobuchar takes a position. She's been a leader on children's health issues, especially children of color and hunger and homes. And she's obviously one of America's top Native Indigenous leaders. And so I think that there's two things there. One is, after it played out with Senator Fischbach and Mark Dayton, Senate Majority Leader Gazelka wanted to make sure that there was a little bit of a proactive, let's just say, defensive move to avoid court cases and issues on whether or not somebody could serve as lieutenant governor and a state senator at the same time. So that's number one. Number two is, after having only had a 1-seat majority previously, I think that Senate Majority Leader Gazelka knows that he'd like a cushion for somebody to be sick during a pandemic, or a couple of years ago, one of the senators had a family health issue and couldn't be around when they needed to vote on budget issues, and it was 33-33. So I think that there is just an operational goal of trying to create some sort of small coalition that keeps the Senate going during a budget year and trying to figure that out. There's a lot of games that could be played, but I think we have to wait the next few weeks or a couple months to see if there is bigger games being played, or if Senator Gazelka was just protecting himself from having Senator Miller become the lieutenant governor in what Democrats believe is a swing seat that they could win.
Great, thank you. You know, the last question I was going to ask is, you've seen there was a little bit of a dynamic here in Minnesota where you had GOPers doing traditional door knocking, voter contact efforts, and you had some DFLers who were not doing that out of as a safety precaution for COVID. And now that Republicans, I think, maybe did a little better than some people expected in Minnesota at the legislative level, have you seen any data that made any impact one way or the other?
I don't know that I haven't seen any data to be clear, but in the weeks leading up to the election, as I talked to dozens and dozens of people who were on the ground or trying to figure out these legislative races, the one thing I heard from legislators and Republican legislators and Republican operatives that were on the ground was that it felt very different at the doors in 2020 than it did in 2018. There wasn't as much of an anti-Trump feeling when you went to somebody's door in 2020 as there was in 2018. On the flip side, Democrats were relying on polls and social media ads. And if you're really bored this weekend, or you just are, kind of a geek and want to look into this, if you just go to Facebook's ad tracker and search Minnesota legislature, you can find all the ads literally from dozens of groups. And if you search by your legislator's name or your candidate's name, you can see the ads run for or against them. And so, JP, what I kept getting from DFLers that were watching these races closely is the polls look good. Our ads are engaging, but there wasn't this idea that they, heard at the door, or they, what people are talking about. And I will say that we didn't, my non-work circle, we'll call it, where I'm with my kids or friends, is that, yeah, they were divided, but there was this kind of common sense sentiment related to social justice issues, the pandemic, some of the state restrictions, et cetera, that just kind of didn't feel as anti-Trump when it came to what was going on in Minnesota. And I think that's what you learn at the door, is kind of the mood of Minnesota. And I do think we started to feel the mood of Minnesota related to the pandemic shift 2 or 3 weeks ago, but the timing of the election made it so that Governor Walz probably couldn't do anything until this week. But I think people started to get a little more worried a couple weeks ago, and the cold weather kind of changed everybody's mind. And then it got really warm in election week, and everybody was focused on the election. So those are the things. One anecdote there, JP, that where data showed some things but didn't show other things, and that's down in Lakeville. The number one seat for Republicans to pick up was the Matt Little seat. I asked a couple legislators, one of whom is known for his promotion of gambling, what his bet was on the Little Duckworth race. And he said, "I'm all in, Duckworth will win undoubtedly." And that's a pretty high level of confidence.
Yeah.
And when I asked Democrats the same question, their answer was, Joe Biden is polling 16 points ahead of where Hillary Clinton was. And so Democrats were really relying on Trump's lack of popularity more so than the local intelligence.
Thank you. One last question that came in the Q&A chat. Dave Muller asked, do you think that the failure to impeach Trump hurt Democrats locally or nationally?
No, I think we were well past impeachment at that point. Anybody who was still remembering that or thinking about it was already on one side or the other. You know, I try to talk to quote normal people as much as I can, and I have a college buddy who lives in the middle of Wisconsin who's a pretty strong Trump supporter, and when he drove to the Twin Cities a couple weeks ago, he said from Wausau, he said, I didn't see one Biden sign between here and Wausau. And I said, well, do you think you saw one 4 years ago? Or, you know, I'm like, this is a totally different election. And I tried to play that out to him. And he immediately went back to, it isn't a different election. We're even more passionate for Trump now because of impeachment, da, 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 da. But that's the only time I heard that was from core, hardcore Trump people. I really think that the pandemic and crime and safety issues were the two things that decided the legislature. And I think at the top of the ticket, the personalities decided it as we kind of look at the margin that Biden won by in Minnesota. Because be clear, Donald Trump got more votes in Minnesota in 2020 than he got in 2016. But DFLers turned out more voters in 2020 than they did in 2016.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Blois. This is fantastic. We're going to be talking about this election for a long time, but it's great to get a kind of high-level view looking back just a week and a half following the election. I did want to go to one of our legislators, Representative Joachim joined us after we had gone through the elected official question earlier, but I did want to give her a chance to answer that. And I've put it back up on the screen here. And Representative Joachim, if you have any thoughts here on what Governor Walz did this week related to COVID, we'd love to hear it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the great program like you always put on. Sorry, I was a little late, but no, I think with this kind of surgical approach, Walz is trying to balance between keeping our economy going and keeping people healthy and safe. I think it's a tough question for anybody. But I also do think that if we are going to keep our kids in at least a hybrid model and get our economy going, that folks really need to take some personal responsibility. We have to keep our masks on, wash our hands, social distance, everything we keep hearing, we actually need to put into practice. Frankly, I have 6 teachers in our family, in our immediate family from early childhood to high school, and each and every one of them would tell you that their students do a better job than adults do about keeping their masks on. So everybody be safe out there, and thank you.
Thank you, Representative Joachim. We appreciate it. If you'll indulge me for one moment, I don't know if Shannon Full is on the webinar. I know she's not on it as a presenter, so I can't put her on the spot, but most of you know that she is leaving Twin West and Minneapolis Regional Chamber to take a new position with running the Fargo-Moorhead Chamber of Commerce. So I did want to make sure that in front of everyone, we make sure to say, one, good luck to Shannon, but two, thank her for her leadership at Twin West and recently with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. She's certainly going to be missed, and we're all grateful for her leadership. And want to thank Blois again, all our elected officials for joining us this morning. We've spent the last 2 months talking about elections. Next month, we're going to pivot to governing. We're going to have a panel talking about a preview of the Biden administration. Jeff Blodgett, who was the Obama-Biden Minnesota campaign director in 2008 and 2012, is going to join us. And then we're also going to have former U.S. Senator David Dernberger, who is going to be with us. And they're going to preview the challenges. Blois teed some of these up. The Biden administration certainly has its challenges coming in, managing a pandemic, but also governing in what is a really divided electorate. So thank you again for joining us this morning. Thank you to our elected officials. And Blois, thank you again. And hope everyone has a great Friday and a good weekend.
Thank you.